going to start the recording, and I know that we want to, Miss Audrey Aridonis would also like to say a few words. So we're gonna let our amazing Deputy Director say a few words about the wrap up.
Thank you so much, Raina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. So my name is Audrey Danis. I'm the Deputy Director of Miami Homes for All. I am so grateful that we get to partner with the Florida Housing Coalition, and in particular Cody, to talk us through what happened in Tallahassee this past legislative session. For many of us here based in Miami-Dade, it feels, quite far away, literally and figuratively, right? So a lot of us may not know, like, what exactly happened and what does this really mean for Miami-Dade County and our residents. And so grateful to Cody to walk us through as it relates to housing. Many of us are working for nonprofits, many of us work for municipalities, many of us work for um, developers, etc. We're all curious to know, what happened in Tallahassee and how will it impact us and, what's next. So with that, thank you again, everyone, for being here. I'll be managing the chat. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat and then I'll find a way to interrupt Cody throughout his presentation to ask him your questions. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure to, Reina will ask those questions and we'll also have some questions sometime at the end for more Q&A. So with that, passing it back to Reina and Cody.
Thank you, Audrey. All right, about a little bit about Miami Homes for All. We were funded in 1985, and Miami Homes for All's mission is that we want everyone in Miami-Dade to have a safe, affordable place to call home. We know that we are missing a huge number of units, over 90,000 units, priced for people that are making $75,000 and below. And we definitely have some updated data coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. But we want to make sure that we improve our ecosystem and our housing ecosystem by doing policy research, by financing deals, and making sure that we have housing navigation and preserving what we already have and increasing residents' access to it. So, this is webinar is also part of the Greater Miami Housing Alliance. And the Greater Miami Housing Alliance, lovingly called GUMHA, is a coalition of advocates, tenant groups, and developers and more working together to ensure that every resident lives in dignity and access to affordable housing. So here is our 2026 policy platform. We will definitely share this PowerPoint with you all later, and this is also on our website if you care to look to look at it. This is our local and our state policy platform. Like I said, please make sure in the chat we are doing welcome introductions. If you put your name, affiliation, and why you're here today, that would be great. And then wanted to go over some Zoom ground rules. So to help us create, a respectful environment where, we can thrive and we can ask questions, these are some ground rules that we want to lay down. So please make sure if you are not speaking to mute yourselves, to minimize background noise, any dogs, any cats, anything like that while people are speaking. Use the chat thoughtfully. Make sure like the chat is used for any questions or any discourse or any resources that we want to put in the chat. Obviously, we want to know who you all are and where you are coming from. So please make sure to rename yourself with your name and your organization. We would love to see your amazing faces. So we want to have your cameras on. And if you have any experience with technical issues, please let us know. And like I said, this meeting will be recorded. So want to make sure that you all know about that. So another thing is our annual report. Please make sure it's also online, but you can also scan this QR code here to see our annual report and what we've been up to in the past year and all the amazing things that we were able to do. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know and connect with us. And this is also on our website. Another special thank you to our key holders and some of our key holders that are here today. We appreciate you, and we are very excited to have you all here and on this webinar. So, without further ado, we're gonna switch and give it up to Cody. Cody, feel free to get us started.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah. So feel free to always interrupt me when I'm throughout this presentation. It's not just talking at the screen. If you have any questions or likes or dislikes about anything I'm going to say today, you think the policy is bad, if you think the policy is great, yeah, I'd just love to be interactive and hear what y'all think about some of these things. But yeah, I mean, big picture, what I'll do is kind of cover most of the things that pass this session that affect housing affordability. Maybe we can talk about some of the property tax stuff too, which I know a lot of is on the front of a lot of people's minds. And then also what is did not pass this session, but will come back next year. So the next slide, just a little bit about us at the Florida Housing Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit. We have about 25 staff that are located throughout the state. I lead a team of about five that focuses just on policy. So we do a lot of policy research, coalition building, stakeholder engagement, just to help build the case for the policy solutions that we need to build and preserve more affordable housing across Florida. And like Momi Homes for All, we are really geared towards that 80% and below AMI range and having policies directed at the folks who are in the most in need, I would say, of housing assistance statewide. So the next slide, you can see just some of our resources. We have a Substack that we post probably once or twice a week. Just kind of like provide quick hits on, bills that passed. We have some, if there's a local government that did something cool on housing or a builder that did something cool on housing, like just post that in the Substack as a resource, so folks can stay up to date on the things that are happening statewide on housing affordability and policy. So yeah, next slide. The big picture thing for this session is that, like the last four sessions, basically, affordable housing is hot in Florida. It's one of the bigger topics that this legislature is focusing on. This was my 10th legislative session dealing with housing, which is not a ton of time in the grand scheme of things. But I would say now more than ever, we are seeing more and more housing bills be filed at the state level, some good, some bad, but a lot more of it is happening. So today I can cover things like, funding for SHIP and SAIL and for other affordable housing programs. Can provide an update on Live Local 4.0, which we're already in the fourth iteration of Live Local. Believe it or not, time goes fast. YIGBY is a hot topic. Yes, in God's backyard, we have a couple laws now that make it easier for faith-based organizations to build affordable housing on their land that we can break down. A lot of stuff on factory-built housing came out this year. And then, of course, the looming Amendment 3 and what that can mean for housing affordability. So we'll start with funding on the next slide to give you a breakdown on what funding looked like in Florida this year. So I lead up a group called the Sadowski Affiliates, which basically is a network of over 1,000 now local advocates that want to champion full funding of our state's affordable housing programs. And the fantastic news is that for the sixth year in a row, the legislature fully funded SHIP and SAIL, which are Florida's two main affordable housing programs. For 2 decades, the legislature swept over $2 billion collected for housing, not on housing, but we are in a new era, fortunately for now, knock on wood, where housing funding is pretty good, relatively speaking, to where it was in years past. Still not enough, but it's still in a good place comparatively. So that means about $70 million for our state's affordable rental housing program and the SAIL program, $165 million for SHIP, which gets sent out to 123 local governments statewide, $50 million more for the Hometown Hero program, which is a down payment assistance program for folks, and a whole lot more. Big picture housing funding was down about 50% since the last legislative session. That's because of that red right there, which is that the legislature did not fund the Live Local SAIL program, unfortunately, which is another affordable rental housing program statewide. But we'll be back next year to get it funded again because it's a very important program that's already worked to support folks at or below 60% AMI. So the next slide you can see is kind of historically where we're at. Yeah.
But a really quick question about that. I know, like, especially with the like you said, it went down 50%. How worried should we be that this becomes like a trend rather than just a 1-year dip?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think the ship and sail program funding, I think is in a relatively good place. I mean, they could always next year not fund it anymore, but we hope they do. And I think the programs that are more on the cutting block are things like Live Local Sail, which are newer programs. Things like member projects. If you see the member project line, there's actually a lot more member projects for housing than ever before. $39 million. Those are like the one-off line item projects in the budget that are for just one representative, one senator that they got in there. So we might see more of those. But I really do think like if Amendment 3 passes, which will cut property tax revenue, I think that a lot of folks are concerned about funding for housing at the state level, right? If the state has to spend more of its budget to fill local government shortfalls, there might be less money for housing at the end of the day. So I think it really just depends on if Amendment 3 passes or not, if depending on how scared we're going to be for next year's funding appropriations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just also a chart to kind of show where we're at funding wise. 2023 was the high watermark because of Live Local. And so basically because the legislature did not fund the Live Local sale program, we're basically back down to 2022 levels, which are still way above before 2021, but clearly going in the wrong direction, although still overall a lot of millions of dollars. So any questions about funding? Next slide has some numbers just for Miami-Dade, which are helpful. As you can see, like for the SHIP program, the small text there. So for SHIP, Miami-Dade County will receive over $7.7 million, Hialeah over $1 million, Miami over $2 million. And these dollars can go to things like down payment assistance, rental assistance, new construction, a whole bunch of different things local government spend this money on. That's an avenue for advocacy to make sure that spending your local SHIP dollars the best that they can be spent.
Okay. Any questions on this for Cody? Well, I know there was, I think for me, like especially I know Miami-Dade is still quite okay. And when we're talking about risk, is there any risk that the legislature would revisit in the distribution formula in a way that funds away from high county needs like Miami-Dade County?
It could, yeah. So one of the efforts these last 2 years was something called the Rural Renaissance,
Yeah.
where if it had passed, it would have basically increased how much rural counties get in SHIP by taking money from the Miami-Dade counties of the world. That did not pass. I think we're pretty safe for now, knock on wood, because the champion of that bill was the Senate president that's no longer going to be the Senate president. So I just don't think it's going to be that much priority moving forward to change the way that SHIP is deployed.
Thank you.
Cool. So the rest of the stuff is non-funding. And I got some next slides are all about Live Local. So Live Local, I'm sure many of you heard those two words put together a lot in the last 3 years. Just kind of showing you the history real quick. Yeah, we're 2023, 3 years ago. We've had 3 sessions since the original act was passed, and a bunch of bills either making technical tweaks to the Live Local Act or making brand new policy. But I think this might be the last iteration we see. I haven't heard any rumblings yet of a Live Local 5.0. That could change, but this could be kind of like Live Local for a while. So the next slide, you'll see kind of one of the main parts of the act. There's a bunch in it. But one of the main pieces of the Live Local Act was the land use mandate. On the next slide, you will see the gist of it. There we go. And this is the tool that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, where basically, if you are in a commercial, industrial, mixed-use area, Live Local Act required local governments to allow multifamily and mixed-use affordable housing. So you are entitled to build affordable multifamily mixed-use affordable housing in commercial, industrial, mixed-use areas as long as 40% of the homes are affordable rentals. And if you qualify to meet these criteria and you are a Live Local project, you get pretty favorable land use entitlements. You are allowed to build to the highest density that you're allowed in the city or county. You have pretty nice height standards. You can reduce your parking by right. You can get administrative approval and not have to go to a public hearing to get your project approved. Pretty good stuff if you're an affordable housing builder. And so on the next slide, you will see kind of like how this has been working. So this tool is about 3 years old. We've been doing our best to track how this is working statewide. And surprise, Miami-Dade is the biggest user of the Live Local Act land use mandate. We are aware of 234 projects statewide that are in the process of using this land use tool. Almost half of them are in Miami-Dade County. Um, so that's clearly y'all are a hotspot for this activity. A lot of the Live Local projects are really in like the main four metro areas of Miami, Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville. But Miami-Dade County is definitely seeing the most of anybody in the state for these projects.
So Cody,
And we are aware of, yeah.
very interesting that you're saying that, Miami-Dade is the largest, like it has the largest ones, but only I see we have the lo largest proposed projects, but we only have about 24 projects under construction. So I was wondering, like, what's actually, in your opinion, like, what do you think is actually happening on the ground here? Do you think that Miami-Dade is ahead of the curve or behind that curve, like because of just a lot of the projects, but only 24 under the construction?
Yeah, I gotta double check and see how many of those ones that have broke ground are in Miami-Dade County. I think big picture, like it's still really early with this thing. I mean, development takes a lot of time. I know 3 years seems like a lot of time in the world, but it's not a lot for development. And I really do think like the next year is when we're going to really start to be able to tell if this is working or not. When we actually have units that are built and occupied. Just market interest rates are higher today than they were in 23. Costs are higher than they were in 23. Like there's a lot of factors for why more projects haven't been built yet. So I think this next year we'll really kind of see like, is this working and why aren't, most of these projects why haven't they actually broken ground yet?
Thank you.
So yeah, so Live Local, that's kind of just some what Live Local does. There were some tweaks that were made to it in Live Local 4.0, which was House Bill 1389. So the next slide, you'll see kind of the main five things that were changed. The top two, I think, are the most important. So under House Bill 1389, the legislature expanded that land use tool to include land owned by counties, cities, and school districts, which is pretty exciting. So if you do any, advocacy to school districts, for example, and trying to get them to, use more of their land for affordable housing, this is a great tool for advocacy, right? Right now, so basically under this tool, if a school district wanted to use some of its vacant land for housing, they could use the Live Local Act to do it, and they wouldn't have to go through like a rezoning, a comprehensive plan amendment, right? It could really fast track affordable housing on school district land in the same way that it could fast track it on city or county owned land. It's really cool stuff there. And the other big thing is YIGB. So last year, Florida passed a YIGB law giving local governments the option to allow housing on faith-based land. Now it is required for certain religious sites that I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, those are the main two, the expanded eligibility of cities, county school districts, and YIGB now being mandatory in certain cases. So before I go on to the YIGB stuff, how familiar are y'all with YIGB? Like in the chat, like is this something that y'all have had meetings on or interest in? Like kind of curious of the room, like what y'all been hearing.
I think the city of Miami has been trying to do some trying to implement YIGB, but I don't think there has been a lot of headway in general in like the greater Miami area. But I think folks are curious. We have the Collective Empowerment Group. I think you may have heard of them, Cody. I think many others have heard of them as well. But I think folks don't know. I mean, my assumption is that folks may not know a lot about YIGB, and they're probably thinking about like, okay, what does this mean for Miami-Dade, and what does that look like to implement?
Yeah, I
Hey,
guess just some
Cody.
basics real quick. Yeah. Hey,
Oh,
Alyssa.
no. Hey, how's it going? So good to be with
Great.
you all. Sorry, I interrupted you. Why don't you finish what you were going to say?
Nah, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Well, it's really nice to see you. It's been a long time. So what I was thinking, just from kind of experienced in my past life with you over at the coalition and then here at Miami-Dade County, what's interesting and, I think maybe what I struggle with is, ensuring beyond just the land, like how does that faith-based institution kind of maintain that skin in the game other than just like a revenue in a way that contributes back to the community and helps kind of participate in like a homeowner association or a condo association, like what is their role? And those are just kind of things that I'm thinking about because as you may know, we have our surtax request for applications for our rental construction, rehabilitation programming. We also have a home ownership component, RFA. Um, and so we do see here and there some deals that incorporate faith-based institutions. But I think that there's a lot of value in not only ensuring that, there's a return on their end where they don't get lost in the mix of that, but also ensuring that kind of they're able to carry out their mission. And I think that that's something important because not only on that aspect, but oftentimes carrying out mission is very focused on like, okay, I want to serve this group of people and this group of people only, but also a deal has to be feasible, right? So if our aim is to solely focus on people in the 30% range, 30% AMI range, that becomes very challenging, right? To have a feasible project to cash flow enough to maintain that project. So I think just as a perspective on my end, I think Yigby is great. I was just listening in on a HUD convening this morning about, faith-based and community group engagement to advance affordable housing initiatives. And I just think that making sure that we continue with these faith-based institutions to encourage them to have an attorney and have kind of the support that they need on their end as they're engaging with the development community. So they have their own protections and then they're maintaining, their part in the deal. I think those are things that are really important as we continue to kind of evolve with this legislation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. And I think I'll get more into the specifics of the legislation itself for folks who may not be familiar. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to like have free pro bono TA for faith groups that have never built housing before. Like many of them have not and don't know what it takes to build something. And I think there's a lot of room for like mission-driven nonprofits to be at the table helping faith groups navigate like what it takes to build and to keep, like you're saying, like make sure that it's not just using their own land up for housing, but actually like they get a portion of the rents or something to make, everyone happy. But yeah, I go to the next slide here and just kind of talk about Gigby for a second. And it stands for Yes is God's Backyard. We didn't make up that term. It's been around for a while, but it's a nice little housing acronym. And so now in Florida, we have two overlapping laws that can get confusing. So last year in 2025, legislature passed what we call the local option, which basically gave local governments the discretion to allow affordable housing on qualifying land owned by religious institutions. And I'll break more down what that means. Now, as of 2 weeks ago, we have a new mandate where local governments are now required to approve affordable housing on qualifying sites through the Live Local Act. So basically, last year there was like legislature said, "Hey, local governments, here's this option, use it if you want." They came back less than a year later and say, "Yeah, well, we're going to mandate you to do it in certain cases. So good luck." So the next slide, you'll see how the local option works. So again, this was passed last year. The Miami-Dade County considered doing this in January, and they voted against it, which I think is why we have the mandate. I think legislators saw like, "Hey, we gave you this tool. Why aren't you using it? And we're just going to mandate you and preempt you to do it anyways." So this optional tool basically says that if you have a piece of land that's owned by a religious institution and it has a house of worship or is next to a house of worship, so it's not just all land owned by religious institutions, house of worship, next house of worship, local government can fast track affordable housing on those sites. So there have been 3 local governments so far that have actually used this tool. That is Melbourne, St. Petersburg, Orange County. On the next slide, you'll see the mandatory tool, which is more complicated. And so basically what House Bill 1389 did was it expanded that live local tool I was talking about to include qualifying land owned by religious institutions. So now if you have land that's owned by a faith-based organization, has a house of worship on it, is larger than 3 acres, not 3 acres, larger than 3 acres, and the house of worship has been active for at least 10 years, then you can use the Live Local Ag land use mandate to get multifamily and mixed use housing built on those sites. So the next slide, I put together a chart showing you the difference between the two things, because it's going to be very important moving forward if you are working with faith-based organizations to know which law applies to you. Because if the mandate applies to that site, you can go forth and build affordable housing and prosper. But if it does not, you have to advocate locally to get your local government to actually approve housing on that site. So for example, under the optional YIGB tool, we're only talking about religious owned land with a house of worship or connected to one or next to one. But for the mandatory tool, if you can see there, it only talks about land with the house of worship on it. The mandate does not apply to land that is next to the house of worship. The house of worship has to be the property where you build the housing on. And there's an acreage stuff. It has to be larger than 3 acres, and the house of worship has to have been there for at least 10 years. For the optional tool, there are no acreage requirements, no newness requirements. It can apply to everything. On the optional tool, local governments can use it to build any kind of housing they want to see. It can be rental, for sale, multifamily, single family, whatever. The mandate, you can only use it to build multifamily. So as I'm going through this, I hope I can just, bring forth the message home. This is complicated and annoying and confusing, and it's going to be very important to kind of know like what applies to you. And so next slide, you'll see one of our main preaching that we're doing right now, and something that I'm concerned about, is that now that we have this state mandate, I'm very concerned that local governments won't take up the optional tool, which does apply to much more land. We did analysis statewide and found that 4 times more land qualifies under the local option than the mandate. So if you are dealing with like smaller parcels that are next to the house of worship, if you want to do single family homes, local option can still be very important, but does require some advocacy. So the next slide, you can kind of see what I'm talking about with the YIGB. We made a map for Miami-Dade County to show you how different these two tools are. So the left side are all the pieces of land that are owned by a religious institution with a house of worship or next to one. And the right side are the places that are 3 acres or more than 3 acres, and have the house of worship on it. So 10 times more land in Miami-Dade County will be eligible for the option than the mandate, which is why it's still very important to advocate locally for the local option.
So I have a question, Cody. Given that it seems like we're like the poster child for this gap, what do you think would be the specific ask that we're asking our elected officials on, who haven't adopted the local option yet? What do you think would be the a great advocacy tool for that?
Yeah, I think the message is about infill. I mean, I think Miami-Dade specifically has a lot of, more than other places, more infill properties that are owned by faith-based organizations that could be really great for affordable housing to be built on. But if you have like an acre and a half parcel, you can't use the mandate. You have to get the county or the city or whoever to actually approve it. So I think the message is like, number one, infill housing is where the option I think really shines. And then 2, it's affordability. So with the local option, local governments get to dictate how affordable the project is. They have complete discretion over what AMI to serve, how much has to be affordable. So that's also a good selling point.
Okay. And then I had a follow-up question about, with Miami and faith-based faith-based organizations that are sitting on land near or under three acres, or their houses of worship haven't been active to 10 years. I feel like it makes like this, they're locked out of the state mandate entirely. So wondering on your end, what do you think is the most practical path forward for those?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, houses of worship, faith-based organizations are like such natural partners in affordable housing advocacy. And I think you can really build a nice local coalition with faith groups at the table with all other housing advocates and like really work together to like get your local government to use the optional tool. Yeah, because it's a really good way to get affordable housing built on these sites that are really close to jobs, close to amenities, and will just benefit a lot more people. And I think, to Alyssa's point, I mean, religious organizations, like, they're mission driven nonprofit. It's like I think they know what the community wants, what they need. They really can be great stewards for the housing that a lot of our communities need.
Yeah.
How do we just email you, Cody, for this map?
Yeah, and yeah, we have some interactive ones I can send to, but yeah, we have some. We picked like 5 or 6 counties that we've done maps for so far, but I can send some of those out.
Awesome, thanks. I'm thinking about, this is awesome to see. Um, but I think a lot of our faith-based institutions may need some support in finding like the right developer partner. But I think that's like a local thing that we would have to your point, like kind of figure out how to foster those relationships and all of that.
I have a thought. When I'm thinking about these institutional parcels, essentially, I would imagine like some of the obstacles that come up may be just like the ownership of the land. So, are you seeing with like the Yigby, with these churches, are you seeing kind of some legal challenges? Just as, a number of years ago, I know there were a lot of challenges like heirs property, right? So, is there kind of a similar situation where the person, are you able to be in touch with the right people with those parcels to be able to get those signatures, from the deed to be able to actually like convey or sign agreements and encumber land, with debt? And I'm wondering what that looks like for like a faith-based, uh, I guess a faith-based owned parcel.
Yeah, so I didn't mention this, but for the mandate. So if you want to like bypass local control and get your project built, the mandate also requires that the house of worship stay open after the housing is built, which I think is unenforceable. Like, what local government is going to like force a church to stay open, for example? But that's in the law. And so I think that is what's going to happen there is, I think with the mandate, I think you're going to see a lot of religious institutions retain ownership of the land and like do some kind of 99-year ground lease with the builder to build the affordable housing on their site. For the option, there isn't that requirement that the house of worship stay open after the housing is built. So there can be some more leeway there. I know St. Petersburg, for example, they only care about ownership at the time of development. So once the project is built, they don't care about who owns the land or building after the housing is built, as long as it stays affordable. Orange County, however, they do require the faith group to retain ownership of some part of the deal. So there are different ways that local government can go about it.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah, fun stuff. I know Enterprise, who has a good presence in Miami. Like, I know they have like a faith-based developer institute that we've worked with them on, and yeah, there's a lot of, I think, good partners in Miami for educating folks on like how to build stuff. So yeah, I can keep going through some of the wonkier things of the session, but I think definitely will still have a positive impact on folks. One thing that I think is fantastic is in House Bill 1389, there were some tweaks to our Florida Fair Housing Act. So since the year 2000 in Florida, Florida's been unique in this respect. It actually is illegal for local governments to discriminate against affordable housing projects when making land use decisions. So this has always been a terrific tool to dispel like NIMBYism to a project, because a local government cannot treat like a light tech property differently or any kind of tax credit property differently because it is a tax credit property. Unfortunately, there was a bad court case a few years ago that threw our Florida Fair Housing Act in doubt. And so what House Bill 1389 did was it made it very clear that if a local government discriminates against an affordable housing project in its land use decisions, that local government can be sued. So for example, if a local government, denies or delays a tax credit property in a way that a market rate property is not denied or delayed, that's a violation. If local government requires an extra public hearing for a light tech property, that a market rate property does not have to go through, that violates the law. So this is a really powerful tool to prevent NIMBYism against subsidized below market rate housing. So it's tremendous. Next thing, Live Local did property taxes. So big picture, Live Local, a lot of stuff in it. One of the things was a bunch of new property tax exemptions for housing. One of the main ones is the MMM, which basically provides property tax abatements to newly constructed multifamily projects that have 71 or more affordable units. If you go to the next slide, once again, Miami-Dade is the leader. Over by far the most units that have tried to get this new property tax exemption are in Miami-Dade, almost 10,000 of them. Most of them are 480 to 120% AMI, but there are some 761 that are 480% and below. So that's kind of some data there. Big picture with Live Local 4.0 is that doesn't really affect Miami-Dade County at all, because what Live Local 4.0 did was it made it harder for certain counties to opt out of this Live Local Act tool. So go to the next slide, you can kind of see those mechanics. So if you do any work outside of Miami-Dade, this might be more interesting. But basically, it just made it harder for local governments to opt out of this tax exemption. But it would not affect Miami-Dade County because y'all's deficit of housing is so great that you would never qualify to opt out in the first place. So sorry about that. Any questions on Live Local before I go into some other stuff? Cool. I'm just going to zoom through these then. They're really specific. For those of you who work with SHIP, there are two bills this year that really help factory built housing. So we're talking like modular housing and manufactured homes built to HUD code. The first big one is about SHIP. Basically, under state law, before this bill was passed, local governments can only spend up to 20% of their annual SHIP dollars on manufactured housing. SB 594 repealed that cap. So if a local government wanted to, it could spend all of its SHIP dollars on manufactured housing. And these bills also required every SHIP jurisdiction to have new strategies in its funding plans to address the needs of people who have been deprived of housing due to the closure of a mobile home park. I don't know off the top of my head about the data in Miami-Dade County about mobile home park closures, but if you had a number of them recently, SHIP now can be clearly used to help those who have been displaced from a mobile home park because the park has closed. So that's something that folks can advocate around, is making sure more SHIP funds are used for those people in need. On the next slide, some zoning stuff with factory built housing. This one's a big deal. So factory built housing is also hip in the affordable housing world. And historically, local governments have a lot of local control over where to allow factory built homes. And most local governments will limit them to very specific parts of the city or county. House Bill 803 changed all that. So basically now every local government has to allow factory built homes by right wherever single family homes are allowed. So this is going to open up a lot more land throughout the state where factory built housing can be placed. So in Miami-Dade County, every zoning district that you have that allows site built single family homes, you also have to allow factory built homes. Big deal if you're a factory built housing person. In the next slide, you'll see that you're not only required to allow factory built homes, but you got to treat them the same as site built homes. You can't put on different regulations to factory built homes that are also applied to site built homes. So I think the big picture here is we're going to see probably more factory built housing options statewide because of this bill.
Hey, Cody, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
sorry, I just always have a lot of questions. So with Florida housing, they generally have specific requirements for materials. I mean, obviously that's rental development, different than a single family home structure that you would have a boxable home on or something. But is there any change to those allowances as well? Because there was the big push for what was it, container homes and this, that, and the other. But, there's very specific materials that are required. So does that kind of translate it all over there?
Not to state funding. This only deals with like local zoning. So if you have like a
Okay.
funding program where
Mhm.
where you have more specifics on like, yeah, building material, design standards,
Right.
resiliency, those can
Okay.
still be tagged on. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, too, this factory built home has to meet code. So as long as it meets code, right?
Yeah, as long as it meets code and it has to be treated as real property. So if
Mhm.
you can have like a home on wheels, that'll be allowed anywhere. It has to be, permanently fixed to the ground and treated as real
Mhm.
property too. And this
Okay.
only applies to like single family too. This is not talking about like bigger scale, like multifamily
Right.
stuff.
Okay. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Cool, cool. So I'm gonna go on to we'll skip this one. Wonky. This one's fun. The one before. Nice. So this one's interesting. So how do I start? So if I'm a builder and I'm trying to get a rezoning, for example, and I'm in a residential area and I want to get something rezoned in a way to allow more housing on it. Let's say I want extra density, I want extra height. So I need something from the local government so I can get more housing built, right? Kind of the main NIMBY playbook a lot of the time is for a community to come out and say, hey, we don't want these extra homes on this piece of property because it affects the community character or because it affects the neighborhood feel, right? You'll see those terms thrown all around in whenever NIMBYs will testify at a public hearing. What House Bill 399 does is it prohibits local governments from just referencing community character or neighborhood feel when they deny projects. If a local government wants to deny a project that is trying to get, more density or more housing built somewhere, they have to have objective specifics for why the project was denied. So it has to be objective planning practices for why you deny a project now, rather than just vibes or references to saying like this won't fit the neighborhood character or the neighborhood feel. It has to be like things like height, density, bulk, the design has to be very objective things and not just vibes.
So even if that's like form-based code or something where it's like you have to have all garages facing this way. And you know what I'm saying? Like, because with form-based code, it's like very, very specific.
Yeah, you can do that. If it's very something like objective and specific, that it is not just vibes, you can still deny a project. But if a project otherwise like meets the code perfectly and is wants to be denied because of like compatibility issues,
Mhm.
that can't happen anymore under this bill.
Okay, thanks.
And next slide, I think it's the last one I have for things that pass. So this only affects three counties, Miami-Dade's one and three. This is about brownfield development in Southeast Florida, Senate Bill 1434. It's basically if you have a brownfield or an environmentally impacted piece of land that's at least 5 acres and is next to a residential district, a lot of exceptions, then local government has to approve new housing administratively on that site. So there's different standards around like what density you get to build up to, certain buffering things in the bill. But big picture is that if you have a brownfield in Miami-Dade County that's just been sitting there vacant, not built on, um, this bill allows you to fast track development on brownfields, basically. So that's something that interests you. This bill would do that.
Alyssa, don't know if you have the answer to this or not. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but do you know of any particular land or environmentally impact sites that would, benefit from this that Miami has? No.
I don't off the top of my head. But my question on this is, does the land have to be remediated first? So like
Yeah.
you still have to go through the like EPA remediation process before you're going to take action.
Right. Yeah. This wouldn't allow like just housing on places that are still contaminated. You still have to,
Just
they still be,
making
yeah,
sure.
which is good. We like that. But yeah, just, this was pushed
Yeah,
by a few developer lobbyists and
Mhm.
probably for their particular projects.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think like if you look at Solmia, right, where like the Costco is in North Miami, like that used to be, I think that's a brownfield. I mean, wasn't that like a landfill forever ago? And it's redeveloped into this like thriving community. Um, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm like almost 100% sure. And it's really just like this beautiful, thriving community. You know, Cody, next time you're in Miami, we'll drive you by. I don't think it's affordable though. So, no, but this is great. Okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, I think there's maps of
Thanks.
brownfields somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So that's mainly most things that pass the session. The next slide, there's like a few other things I'm not gonna get into, but a lot of wonky stuff other than like live local and YIGBY. A lot of like particular permitting bills, a lot of like, yeah, just code reform stuff. Here are the bills that died that will probably be back next year. I think the big one is probably the Florida Starter Homes Act. That one has already gotten a lot of momentum to come back next year. And what that bill would do is basically if you are a residentially zoned lot that's connected to water and sewer, it would allow up to a quadplex on those lots statewide. So basically, it would take away single family only zoning statewide if you're connected to water and sewer and let you build, duplexes, triplexes, quads, townhomes statewide on very small lots. That's going to come back. We'll see if it passes next year. There's also a TOD bill that died that wouldn't have affected Miami-Dade that much because I feel like Miami-Dade already has pretty good TOD policies, but it had some standards around like density and height close to permanent public transit stops. The ADU bill died again for the second year. It's going to come back again next year, year three, to basically allow ADUs in single-family districts statewide and some other stuff. Yeah.
Uh,
Any questions
Hey,
on that?
Cody.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I feel like I have all these questions. So with the Starter Homes Act, even if it's a single family zone lot now, and it automatically what preempts, how would I say that? Like it preempts the local law. So it allows them to
Yeah.
build like a triplex or duplex. So with that, would the requirement to update like infrastructure still apply? Because like if you go from like a duplex or a single family home to like a quad, your pipe size is going to change in your infrastructure. So does that bill account for that? Because that can be a few $1 million right there because it's really the capacity, right? So while they may be allowed to, because of that like preemption in a way, they're still going to have to adhere to like the requirements for infrastructure and pay out of pocket for something like that, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. There's some language that I snuck into the last version last year, which hopefully comes back next year, to make it very clear that if all sort of like local like level of service, infrastructure standards, all those things still apply. So the bill
Okay.
would basically say that like if you have a lot connected to water sewer, local government can't require the lot to be larger than 1,200 square feet, and you could have up to 4 units on it. But after that, if you have, yeah, like access management issues, if it's in the floodplain, you have floodplain laws, if there's issues with like, yeah, like the size of the pipes or the roadway network, like all those things can still like limit projects, but it wouldn't be limited through zoning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
Question, Cody, for you on the ADUs. I know the ADU bill. I know it died the second time again this year. And I was just on in your opinion, uh, where do you think the tension is specifically? Where is it specifically that it's kind of like tanking this bill? Miami-Dade has it has a big ADU market. And where for you do you think is, the thing that's holding it back, and how can we advocate properly for it, or what can we do to make sure that it passes the third time?
Yeah, the main thing is short-term rentals. I mean, this became a short-term rental bill. I guess some like inside baseball stuff is that the previous House Speaker, who's no longer there, he basically sat the short-term rental lobby in the cities and counties in the same room and said, during my speakership, we are not touching short-term rentals at all. Um, period. That was the mandate from on high. And to kill the bill, essentially, I think the League of Cities and Counties made it a short-term rental bill because the Senate version would have allowed local governments to, limit ADUs as being rented on a short-term basis. And that just blew the whole bill up. And the speaker is basically like, yeah, I said we're not going to touch this. Anything that smells like short-term rental, like it's basically dead. And so I really think like it depends on like what the next speaker and president think about it, and like if they ever resolve their disagreements about like whether ADUs can be limited from being Airbnb, basically.
Okay, thank you.
I have I have one other question if nobody else does. I don't want to take up the floor. Um, so other than the change to manufactured homes on in the LHAP, and repealing that 20%, are there any other changes in ship world that we should be aware of?
That's the only ship world change. Um, yeah, that's the only one.
Right. Okay. And Cody, are you guys going to be hosting a webinar about the federal housing bill? I saw some stuff on your Substack on that.
Yeah, I'm trying to put together. We might have something at our conference on it, but probably either September or October. We're gonna have some like national folks on too to explain what's all in it. 'Cause it's very long, it's tedious.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll
And
try to have something.
do you know with those CDBG changes? Because I mean, obviously it's in law, but it can't be immediate, I would imagine, because there has to be like there has to be kind of language and like CFR and like program guidance. Like how long does something like that normally take to implement like new language? For instance, like construction activities for CDBG, like that wouldn't be an immediate change, right?
Yeah, so for the CDBG thing about making CDBG an eligible use or new construction eligible use, that would apply to like any future CDBG money.
Got
But
it.
the stuff about giving more money to certain local governments that have more housing supply and
Mhm.
taking away from those that don't, I don't know when that goes into effect.
Right. I mean more the construction side of things. So like 2027 money that comes in is going to be, that's where we'll
So,
be able to use it. Okay. I just,
well, I'll double check.
I wasn't sure in the timing what that would look like. So I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but
No, I'll double
I
check.
figured I'd ask since I had you, since you know everything.
Yes. We're talking about Amendment 3?
Yes. Fun part.
Yikes. Yeah, so Amendment 3 being voted on in November. This would you've probably seen it in the news a lot and stuff. It would increase the homestead exemption from 25K to basically $250,000 by 2028. Basically, any home valued at $250,000 or less, we no longer pay property taxes for any kind of non-school related property tax. We at the Florida Housing Coalition, we're not going to come out with a position saying like vote yes or no on Amendment 3, but I do think there are a lot of concerns that we have about it. If you want to go to the next slide, I guess first I'll talk about the positive, which is like by reducing property taxes for everybody who is a homestead property owner, there are certainly going to be people that really struggle to pay property taxes. They're going to be helped. Like I'm thinking like low income seniors, low income homeowners, first time home buyers. Like it's going to reduce people's property tax bills, like for people who like really need it. But it is not targeted to people who really struggle to pay. It's everyone across the board in the state of Florida. If you are a homesteaded property owner, you get a sweet property tax break, meaning it does nothing for renters. And so we're very concerned that, to offset revenue impacts, local governments will be forced to raise property taxes on anyone who's not a homestead property owner, which could mean higher rents. Very concerned about what this would mean for just local budgeting overall, and specifically what it means for like local affordable housing programs. I know Miami-Dade has a great like geo bond program and has used, general revenue for housing in the past quite a bit. Those would be in jeopardy if, other priorities have to go to the fore when there's a lot less money to be used for services. Going back to home prices, like we don't know. Like I can see this clearly, just like raising home prices if you don't have to pay property tax anymore. And I've already actually heard from 3 ship offices say that they might have to deny ship funding because they won't be able to pay for staff for the ship program. So we're just gonna be doing like we're kind of staying our lane on this one. Like I'm voting no on it personally. I can't tell you what the coalition is, but like we're gonna be we're doing some member outreach, some data on like what this will do to the affordable housing industry, and I think it's overall negative for when you look at the big picture. But more to come on this, but you have to answer questions about like what this could do to Florida.
Hi, Megan. I'm with the Health Foundation of South Florida. We also operate the South Florida Anchor Alliance, and we have a working group. And hi, Raina. Um, we have a working group focused on workforce housing. And yesterday, when our group convened, we had a member from Broward County, I know separate, but they were talking about how this particular bill, because there isn't a carve out for general funds being able to be used for affordable housing, that the housing authority and the TIF dollars that they have set aside for affordable housing would become at jeopardy. They would no longer be allowed to use that money. So I don't know if you've heard that, how if the same is the case for Miami-Dade County, but it seemed like a piece of the conversation that I just learned about that would be important to understand better.
Yeah, so the first version of this amendment that the governor originally proposed would
Mm-hmm.
have put great limits on how local governments could use property tax revenue. In the first version of the amendment, local governments wouldn't be able to use their money on affordable housing at all. However, the amendment that voters are actually going to vote on this November was tweaked by the legislature so that local governments can still use their property tax revenue on whatever they want, but they would have way less of it, is essentially it. So it would definitely put like if a local government had planned to spend like $10 million a year from GR on housing, they're probably going to be rethinking that and probably not spend the money that way anymore. It's just the reality.
So it's like an ancillary result of it, not a direct
Right.
carve.
It's like, if you're faced between like, do I pay for public services or public safety or parks or schools or roads versus affordable housing? Like I think most local governments would just use the other stuff first.
Yeah, exactly. There were specific things that they needed to use their funds for. Now, their general use funds, the remaining dollars needed to go towards, fire safety, things like safety measures. And since affordable housing wasn't listed, and whatever remaining funds were done would only be able to cover those emergency services. So just inadvertently, then there'd be no money left over to keep supporting the housing trust fund and affordable housing projects through the county.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions around this topic? I know we've been talking a lot about it, so this is a great time to ask questions and to really consider what's at stake for Miami-Dade County. I think Cody, my question is, I know we talked about potential loss of shift funding and things like that. Do you by any chance know what that could look like in terms of numbers for Miami-Dade County, or like a ballpark number of how much money we could lose in chip?
It's all like very speculative. Like, and I know folks are like CAP, which is like the Coalition of Sustainable Housing Providers, already like thinking through this. Like, if Amendment 3 passes, more local governments are going to have to rely on the state for funding. And so the idea is like the state probably will devote more of its budget to help local governments fill their shortfalls, which means they might be more inclined to sweep Sadowski money. It's not it's not guaranteed that they would sweep ship or sale for those purposes, but they could. And that's just kind of what we're worried about. But yeah, I mean, I do want to end on a positive note. I mean, I'm not a fan of Amendment 3, but overall, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff happening statewide on housing that's not Amendment 3, like Gig B and Live Local and full funding. And yeah, just a lot of interesting stuff happening.
Will you guys be sending out the PowerPoint?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
We sure will.
All right. Thank you guys. Really appreciate everything.
Cody, I'm not sure if um I'm going further than I'm skipping ahead or not. Tell me what I'm doing.
No, yeah, you're good. Yeah, I can wrap up. Yeah, we have a survey that we have out there I can send out too for like we're surveying all of our members, which are mostly like local governments and affordable housing developers, to say like, how is this Amendment 3 going to impact your work if it passes? Yeah, overall, we're just trying to compile data. We're doing some, we might do analysis to like assess how rents could be increased if this thing were to pass. That might be interesting, but yeah. Thanks for having me. I know every year I feel like it gets more complicated to share this stuff because it all gets just more and more nuanced and confusing. But I appreciate you all having me.
No, thank you, Cody. And I know we have like a like maybe another slide. Would you want to go? And I know we have a few more minutes left, but would you like to talk to us a little bit briefly about like what's next and looking ahead into 2027 and what we have going on in terms of that session and what we should be looking towards advocating?
Yeah, so this is a big year, big election cycle. We're gonna have a new governor next session. We're gonna have a new House Speaker, new Senate President. There's a lot of like genuinely good positive momentum around like state housing policy overall. I think we're definitely going to be always advocating for fully funding ship and sale, hopefully for the seventh straight year. We are in support of the Florida Starter Homes Act, which is going to come back, and we'll see, if it passes and if it does pass, like if it gets watered down at all. Definitely going to keep advocating for the ADU bill, so that ADUs get allowed statewide, wherever single family houses are allowed. And yeah, I think it's gonna be a really interesting opportunity for next year. Like I think the Senate Speaker, the President Speaker Board indicated that they are wanting to do more on housing affordability. And I think it's kind of like the people kind of got jaded and tired of talking about live local for so many years. So we might just see a whole new set of policies come out next year. And yeah, we'll see what makes the final cut.
Thank you, Cody. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your resources and any talking points and all of those things?
Yeah, so I mean, something that we're doing more of this year than maybe ever before is really being involved in like local campaigns, for like city and county commission seats, state legislator seats. And so if anyone's like doing any kind of like candidates forums or meeting with candidates for office, we have some materials and like how to structure questions, data you could, read ahead of time to be prepared for those meetings. Yeah, we're working with quite a few groups around the state on things like candidates questionnaires and marketing pieces and things like that. So always happy to be of service to make housing be front and center this year.
Well, with that, we want to thank Cody so much for talking through all of the things that happened with the legislative session. I believe we have about maybe 5 minutes for any questions. Does anybody have any questions for Cody? Okay. Well, if you all have any questions for Cody, here is his email. And we definitely, if you have any questions for MHFA, my email is there as well. Oh, look, both of our emails are there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Like I said, we will for sure send out the PowerPoint slides to you all. This meeting is also being recorded, so we will also send that out to you all as well. Once again, we thank everyone for being here today and taking the time to listen and to ask some thought-provoking questions. And we look forward to continue working with everyone and gearing up for the next session. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And we will see you next time.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks. Bye.